10 years ago, she was just a girl hiding behind a clock, terrified. Today, she's a hardened investigator, tracking the most powerful people. Her search for the truth about her family's death has pushed her into a world where no one can be trusted, and the closest friend could be the deadliest enemy. How far will she go for answers? I'm Clyde, and I'll tell you her story on the Best Mystery Book Podcast.
Chapter 31. Washington, D.C., Monday, April 17, 2023, 12:20 p.m. Situated along the banks of the Potomac River, McCormack University was gorgeous, prestigious, and a stone's throw from the Chadwick's brownstone. That Duncan Chadwick had ended up at a school so close to home was no accident. Larry knew the dangers of unleashing his delinquent son at a faraway college where Larry's ability to bail him out of trouble would be limited. Larry had insisted on Duncan staying on the East Coast in order to keep his political influence available. Washington, D.C. was even better. Now, his son needed Larry's far-reaching political powers more than ever. But this time, he wasn't fighting to keep a DUI off a minor's record. This time, Larry was fighting for both Duncan's future and his own. The outdoor press conference was standing room only. 50 folding chairs had been set up in front of the podium that stood outside the arched gates of McCormack University. Every seat was full. An overflow press stood in a ballooning crown behind them. News cameras waited at the ready, and at exactly 12:20 in the afternoon, Larry ushered Renee and Duncan to the podium. Both he and Duncan had dressed in charcoal suits with blue ties, offering a not-so-subtle message that Duncan was the spitting image of his father, a well-respected public servant. Larry took his position behind the podium and adjusted the microphone as he allowed the news cameras to zero in on him and his perfect family. "Good afternoon," he said. "It has been brought to my attention that something terrible has taken place at McCormack University, where my son, Duncan, is enrolled. A girl, whose name I will not mention in an effort to honor her privacy, has been raped. The information I have tells me that this incident happened not only on the McCormack University campus, but at the fraternity where Duncan is currently a member. First and foremost, my thoughts and prayers go out to this young woman." Larry paused and looked down at his notes. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession from the gallery. This news was a shock to Renee and me, and it was a stunning revelation to Duncan. As a united front, we want to speak out against any and all forms of sexual assault. Renee and I have had long and sometimes awkward discussions with Duncan about consent and about what constitutes assault. We are proud of the values we've instilled in our son, and Duncan is eager to speak about this incident today. Larry looked over. "Son?" Duncan nodded and replaced his father at the podium. The camera shutters clicked with a new intensity when Larry Chadwick's son stood behind the microphone. He swallowed hard and cleared his throat before speaking, an audible quiver to his voice. "Like my dad said, I was shocked to hear that a classmate had been raped, and even more surprised to learn that the rape took place at my fraternity. Details are still coming out, but I'm here with my parents today to say that I believe the victim, who, like my dad said, we won't name because she wants to remain anonymous. But I believe her, and I stand by her. I also want to say that despite the strong friendships I've made through the Delta Chi fraternity, effective immediately, I will be revoking my membership and working in any capacity possible to help the victim find justice. Thank you." Duncan stepped back from the podium as reporters began to shout questions. Larry resumed his spot and held up his hands to quiet the crowd. "Judge Chadwick," an aggressive reporter shouted, "will this affect your nomination to the Supreme Court?" "We won't be taking questions this afternoon," Larry said. "However, before we close this press conference, I want to make a pledge to the victim and her parents that I will do everything in my power to help bring her attacker to justice. I encourage the victim and her family to reach out to me if they feel that I can be of help in any way. I'd also like to mention that immediately following this press conference, Duncan will be speaking with the police to help the authorities in any way possible. Judge Chadwick, are you still the president's nominee for the Supreme Court vacancy? Thank you for your time this afternoon, Larry said. God bless. And God bless the victim of this horrific crime. Reporters continued to shout questions as Larry gathered his family and solemnly walked from the podium and climbed into a waiting town car. Chapter 32. Washington, D.C., Friday, April 21st, 2023, 11:35 p.m. All hell had broken loose. Her story had leaked. Laura knew that the longer she investigated, and the more people she spoke with certain details about her story, would begin to circulate through campus. She had always figured she'd be able to stay ahead of the gossip, but somehow her story had leaked. Not just a few teasers, but nearly every detail of her episode was floating around McCormack University in some form. Duncan Chadwick's phone call had tipped her off. The Chadwick's press conference had confirmed it. Laura hadn't answered Duncan's call and had kept a low profile for the past week to avoid running into him or other members of the Delta Chi fraternity. The press conference had sent shockwaves through campus and was all anyone was talking about. It had come out of nowhere, and Laura knew it was explicitly time to preempt her episode and take the bite out of her story. The press conference had accelerated things in a way Laura had not anticipated, and now she had a decision to make: drop her episode and reveal everything she had discovered over the last month, or sit back and allow the police to uncover it all on their own. But the university had known about the rape for weeks and had done nothing about it. She worried that the authorities would follow the same path of victim blaming until the story went away, keeping the university's reputation unsullied. Although nervous about the position the episode would put her in, at the center of a massive controversy involving a prominent political figure and his son, Laura had no choice but to go forward with it. She twirled the memory stick between her fingers as she sat in the School of Journalism's recording studio. Laura had completed her interviews, finished the investigative legwork, polished her voice, overwork, and stored the completed episode on both the thumb drive and as a downloaded file on her phone. Of course, the entire episode was also stored on the recording studio's computer hard drive. But airing the episode from the studio was no longer an option. Things had changed dramatically since she sat in the studio a week earlier. Back then, she believed she had time to decide when and how to drop the episode. But now that her story had leaked, the names of those involved had started to spread through campus, and the Chadwicks were on the offensive. Word had trickled down to her that the university was considering shutting her show down. Laura needed to act, and to act now. Her plan was bold. She would bypass using McCormack University's bandwidth and broadcasting platform, which had always been Laura's first method of distributing her stories before uploading them to her social media accounts. Instead, she'd go solo on this one and just post the episode online to her 1 million-plus followers. Then, she'd go into hiding for a few days. Maybe she'd hole up in a hotel and see how things unfolded. She thought about going home but didn't want to bring attention to her parents in case the press or the police, or the federal government, for Christ's sake, came looking for her. Holy shit, she whispered into the darkened studio, trying to understand how this story had gotten so big. She slipped the thumb drive into her backpack and zipped it closed. After pulling the straps over her shoulders, she locked the recording studio and headed across campus. She had some serious thinking to do, and even considered reaching out to Dante Campbell in the morning to discuss the story and ask for Dante's help getting the word out. But she knew that might take too long because Dante and NBC would need to comb through every detail of her story to confirm the accuracy of it. Laura had already done the combing, though, and knew her story was accurate. As she exited campus, she cut through Horace Grove, a wooded area that skirted the campus. It was a shortcut that shaved 5 minutes off the commute to her apartment, and was frequented by students at just about every hour of the day and night. Although on this night, it was strangely abandoned. She secured her AirPods and clicked on the download of her episode to listen to it one last time. If she found no errors, the decision was made. She'd drop it tonight and let the pieces fall where they may. The intro to The Scoop chimed through the earbuds as she started off along the path through the woods. It was the last time anyone would see Laura McAllister alive. Part 4. A missing persons case. I'm on a deadline. Annette Packard. Camp Montague, Appalachian Mountains. They waited until late to go out. The campfire had ended more than an hour ago, and they'd passed the time playing Texas Hold'em in his cabin until they were sure the camp was sound asleep, and the counselors were no longer on their nightly prowl to catch kids out past curfew. After 5 summers at Montague, he and his friends knew their way around. His first time at camp was the summer after 8th grade, when he was 13. The earliest Montague allowed kids to register. Now he had just finished his senior year in high school and would soon be off to college. This was his last summer at Montague. The finality of things allowed him, and the rest of the 5th years, to take more chances. There could be no real penalty for breaking the rules. The normal course of action each summer was for the counselors to add up each camper's merits, subtract any strikes, and then adjust their ranking for the following summer. Since neither he nor his friends were coming back to Camp Montague, this was the first summer that earning merits and accumulating strikes was meaningless. All the 5th years were aware of the loophole, and it explained why each summer this select group of campers ran by their own rules. He opened his cabin door and took a cautious look around. When he saw that the camp was quiet, he nodded, and the group of 4 hurried out of the cabin and disappeared into the woods, clicking on flashlights to find the path. After 15 minutes, the sound of the falls made its way faintly through the trees, and they picked up their pace. When they made it to the clearing, the moonlight reflected off the waterfall and colored the pond a tranquil shade of silver. "Hey," came a whisper from the other side of the pond. He smiled and waved when he saw the girls. He and his friends hustled over. There were 8 of them. 4 guys and 4 girls. One of them had snuck a case of beer from camp. They preferred fruity seltzers but took whatever they managed to steal from the main lodge. Tonight it was Budweiser, which went down badly. No one complained. They were a bunch of 18-year-olds on their last summer excursion to Montague, a place that had defined their adolescent experience. None saw each other outside of camp each summer. They lived in different towns in different states. But this summer, they ruled Montague and would wring every ounce of adventure out of their last summer here. After they'd all had a couple of beers, the guys threw their shirts onto the rocks and dove into the pond. The girls stripped off their cut-off shorts to reveal bathing suits underneath and followed the guys. Together they swam toward the falls, and for 20 minutes braved the water that poured down from the mountain. When it was time to head back, they entered the woods and found the trail. When they got back to camp and split off in different directions, they tried to stay in the shadows. He cut around the east side of camp and was about to step out of the woods when he heard one of the camp counselors' cabin doors squeak open. He took a quick step behind a tree, made sure he was bathed in darkness, and watched. He saw Mr. Lolland, one of Montague's lead counselors, walk from his cabin. With him was a girl. Mr. Lolland had his hand on her neck as if he were consoling her. He slunk through the woods and followed them through camp, using the foliage as cover as he watched Mr. Lolland lead the girl back to her cabin and usher her inside. A moment later, he saw Jerry Lolland head back to his own cabin. A sickening feeling came over him. He knew what had happened. During his first summer at Montague, he too had been one of Mr. Lolland's victims. The campfire was dying. He stayed hidden in the spot he had staked out after dinner, a small clearing in the woods behind the trunk of a sturdy oak. The location provided a perfect view of Mr. Lolland's cabin. Off in the distance, he saw the campsite begin to thin as his fellow campers concluded the night with the Montague pledge and headed to their cabins. It was 40 minutes later, after cabin lights blinked off, that he saw Mr. Lolland's door open. He pressed himself against the trunk of the oak and waited until Mr. Lawland was a good way into camp before he crept from the shadow of the oak and started his silent march through the forest as he followed. He watched through the foliage as Mr. Lawland passed through the area of camp reserved for second-year campers. Stepping through a stream, he crept closer to the edge of the forest to get a better view as Mr. Lawland entered the area where first-year recruits were housed and approached a cabin. A minute later, Mr. Lawland emerged from the cabin with a girl by his side. He retraced his steps as he followed them through camp, eventually returning to the small clearing behind the sturdy oak. It was there that his life changed. It was there that he watched Jerry Lawland lead the girl into his cabin. It was there that he hesitated. He should have done so many things. He should have run from the woods and stopped Mr. Lawland from taking the girl into his cabin. He should have run to the main lodge and found the other counselors and told them what was happening. But to do that would mean to admit that the same thing had happened to him, and the shame he harbored from his time in Jerry Lawland's cabin was greater than the guilt he felt for allowing it to happen to someone else. He didn't stop Mr. Lawland that night, but as he stood in the dark shadows of the forest, he came up with a plan to make sure Jerry Lawland never hurt anyone again. Chapter 33. Washington, D.C., Saturday, April 22, 2023, 11:45 p.m. Byron Zell sat at his desk and tapped away at his new computer. Small MacBook he had purchased to replace his desktop after authorities confiscated it. In just a few short weeks, his life had gone to hell. In addition to the financial crimes his company had accused him of, he now had the bigger issue of several felony counts of possession of child pornography to deal with. Garrett Lancaster had cut all ties with him, and although Byron couldn't yet prove it, he was certain someone had either been in his apartment or, more likely, hacked into his computer. It was the only explanation for how his private financial documents, in which he kept his stash of pornography from the dark web, had been sent to Lancaster and Jordan. He'd reached out to 3 different criminal defense firms until he finally found a taker. But the firm was a far cry from the powerhouse that was Lancaster and Jordan. Still, his best approach was to attack the method by which the authorities had obtained his personal information, which was through a fraudulent email sent to Garrett Lancaster. Byron possessed a receipt from the convenience store where he had purchased 2 Red Bulls and a bag of chips. On the receipt was the date and time of the purchase, which coincided with the time the email was sent. Byron's new attorney was in the process of pulling surveillance footage from the convenience store to prove Byron's whereabouts. If Byron could prove that he was away from his apartment and his computer at the time the email was sent, then the evidence, 2 gigs worth of child pornography from the dark web, would not be admissible, and the charges against him would be dropped. It should be enough, but even then there would be fallout. He'd likely still have to register as a sex offender, and would never hold a meaningful job again. And once this latest disaster was behind him, Byron would begin anew his fight against embezzlement charges. He dwelled as he pecked away at his new laptop. A shit life he was leading. He tried not to dwell on what would happen if his attorney could not get the child pornography charges dismissed. If convicted of the financial crimes he was accused of, they would send him to a country club prison for a few months. He had friends who'd done time in such establishments and made it through unscathed. But his infatuation with children was another story. That carried a harsher penalty, and going to a real prison would be a death sentence, especially if the caged animals learned why he was there. Still, with all the dread and worry on his mind, he felt a familiar urge bubble up inside of him as he sat in front of his computer. It was an urge he had never been able to quell. A few minutes on the dark web wouldn't hurt anyone. This time, he would resist the temptation to download the images that particularly aroused him. He tapped the keyboard and turned on the private browsing feature so that his search history would not be logged. Then, he went through a series of web pages and logins. This seldom explored corner of the internet was a familiar place, somewhere he visited to break free from social norms that constrained his life and his urges. He planned to spend just a few minutes there that night, half hour at most. In this shadowed corner of the internet there was no judgment or shame. He was allowed to like what he liked, and no matter what that might be, It could be found there at the darkened edge of humanity. For Byron Zell, his vice was children. He spent a little longer than intended browsing the sites. He convinced himself that if he somehow managed to escape the shit storm he was in, tonight would be his last time on the dark web. That final perusing of underage children would be a way to get it out of his system, once and for all. Some part of his psyche believed it. Deeper down, though, he knew it was a lie. He suffered an addiction that could never be cured. After an hour, he closed his computer, turned off the desk lamp, and left his office. The lights of the city were visible through the living room windows of the high-rise apartment. The night was clear, and the moon a waxing crescent that lighted the hardwood floor just enough for Byron to navigate to the kitchen, where he opened the refrigerator and reached for the milk carton. The glow from the open refrigerator cast his shadow across the kitchen island. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught the image of another shadow that did not belong to him. Byron turned, and the carton of milk fell from his hand when he saw the figure in black standing on the other side of the kitchen, the barrel of a gun reflecting the light from the refrigerator. Instinctively, he raised his hands. "I have money." The figure in black held up photos of child pornography. Byron tried to protest, to deny it, but the words caught in his throat, and he was unable to breathe. The noise registered, but that was all. He waited for the pain, but it did not come. He was aware of his surroundings one moment, and dead the next. Byron Zell fell in a heap to the kitchen floor. He did not fall forward and was not propelled backward by the bullets that entered his body. One to the face, the other to the chest. He simply collapsed. His knees buckled, and his legs folded underneath him like a blow-up toy that had been deflated. The shooter walked over to the heap, threw the photos of child pornography onto his dead body, and then hurried out of the apartment. Chapter 34. Manhattan, nigh Tuesday, April 25th, 2023 at 2 a.m. Tracy Carr's body dripped water as she climbed from the shower and grabbed the towel off the rack. She dried off before bending forward and capturing her soaking hair in the towel and spinning both on top of her head. She walked into the bedroom, clicked on the television, and let the morning news play in the background as she pulled on underwear and a bra. Her phone vibrated from the night table, and Tracy saw that it was her editor calling. She swiped the phone to activate the call. "Hey, Gary," she said. "Are you watching the news?" Tracy turned her attention to the television, where a CNN anchor was speaking, while a red news alert banner blinked at the bottom of the screen. A ploy that had long ago lost its shock value. A lost dog was breaking news to most 24-hour cable programs. "I just stepped out of the shower," Tracy said. "What's going on? Remember Larry Chadwick's news conference from last week?" "How could I forget? It was basically a campaign commercial to show how caring he and his son were toward victims of sexual assault. Political theater." "Yeah. Well, that news conference is starting to look less like theater and more like an attempt to deflect guilt. A McCormack University girl named Laura McAllister is missing. Word on the street is that she was the student journalist who was looking into the rape Larry Chadwick and his son referenced during their news conference. Details are scarce, but I'm sure there's a bigger story there. I want you on it." Tracy read the glowing banner at the bottom of CNN's broadcast. "College student missing in Washington, D.C. When?" "Now. As soon as possible. Get down to D.C. and see what you can uncover. I want an opening article for tomorrow's edition. As much as you can get. Then, more details as you uncover them. You'll be on the story until we see how this thing ends, and if it's in any way connected to Larry Chadwick." "I'm on it. I'll call you when I'm down there." Tracy ended the call. She watched the rest of the CNN segment. A missing college student on the heels of a bizarrely timed press conference from the president's likely choice to fill the Supreme Court vacancy. Could there be a connection there? Tracy planned to find out, and she couldn't have asked for a better story to fall from the sky. It was a potential blockbuster. Hard facts were still unknown, which meant speculation would be wild. Perfect for drawing in viewers to her social channels. It meant that the truth was still waiting to be found, and her ravenous audience would eat up any tidbit information she was able to turn up. Tracy was a master manipulator of society's sad but real affliction, a gluttonous appetite for the gory details of true crime. It was how Tracy made her living, as a quasi-celebrity, as Lawrence Chadwick had become over the last month as he was courted by the president, to the disappearance of a young, attractive college girl, and Tracy Carr had ratings gold in front of her. In addition to her gig as a crime reporter for the New York Times, Tracy Carr ran a successful YouTube channel that covered true crime. She sported 6 million subscribers and the channel was fully monetized, earning her 6 figures from ad revenue alone. She employed 3 people to run the channel. Her old college roommate organized the advertising and optimized the channel's placement on YouTube and around the internet. A production editor collected the raw footage Tracy recorded and truncated it down to short, watchable videos. And then there was Jimmy, her cameraman. Shoots were typically structured and scheduled, but the quickly developing story she had just been assigned required fast action. She picked up the phone. "Jimmy," Tracy said, "something's come up. I need you to pack a bag and all your equipment. We're heading to DC." "When?" Jimmy asked. "Right now. A college girl's gone missing. But that's just the beginning of it. I'll pick you up in an hour." Chapter 35. Washington, D.C., Tuesday, April 25th, 2023, 9:15 a.m. The offices of Lancaster and Jordan were located on the 10th floor of the 1 Franklin Square building in Washington, D.C. The conference room was prepped for this morning's meeting. Garrett had cleared his schedule, as had Jacqueline Jordan, the other founding partner of the firm. Jacqueline would, in fact, be lead counsel should Lancaster and Jordan take Matthew Claymore on as a client. Garrett and Jacqueline stood when Matthew and his parents entered the large conference room, which was dominated by a long mahogany table that shined with morning sunlight spilling through the windows that overlooked Franklin Park. The dome of the Capitol building was in the far distance. "Matthew," Garrett said as he extended a hand. "Garrett Lancaster, nice to meet you. This is my partner, Jacqueline Jordan." "These are my parents," Matthew said. "Patrick and Sheila." Handshakes were exchanged. "Thanks for taking the meeting so quickly," Patrick Claymore said. Garrett and Jacqueline's research told them that Patrick and Sheila Claymore owned a string of grocery stores on the East Coast and were obnoxiously wealthy. Their son, Matthew, was a business major at McCormack University. The school had been in the news the past week after Larry Chadwick's press conference, when the Claymores requested a meeting to inquire about Lancaster and Jordan representing Matthew in a potential missing persons case involving a McCormack University student. Garrett and Jacqueline quickly set up a meet and greet. "Of course," Jacqueline said. "Have a seat. I hope we can help." "Coffee, before we get started?" The Claymores declined. Matthew sat at the head of the conference table, since he would be doing most of the talking. His parents sat to his left with Garrett and Jacqueline to his right. Jacqueline opened a leather folder and turned a few pages on a yellow legal pad. "Matthew," she said, "your parents gave us some preliminary information over the phone, but Garrett and I will need you to get us fully up to date." "Okay," Matthew started. "I'm a senior at McCormack University. Over the weekend, my girlfriend... I don't know. She stopped returning my texts and went quiet on social media. She's done that before when she gets busy with her show." "Her show?" Jacqueline asked. "Yeah, she's a journalism student with, like a really popular campus radio program." "Popular is being modest," Patrick Claymore said. "Laura's radio show, a podcast really, is listened to by hundreds of thousands of people each week, based on downloads." Jacqueline scribbled some notes. "What's your girlfriend's name?" "Laura McAllister." Jacqueline nodded as she continued to write on her legal pad. Go on. The Scoop started out as a radio program Laura did each week from the broadcasting studio on campus. At first, it was just like pop culture and gossip. Laura did this segment called Camp Sip, as in campus gossip, where she found the wildest stories from colleges around the country and talked about them. Anything from student-professor hookups to a formal gone wrong. During my freshman year, everyone started listening each Thursday night. It was like a McCormack U thing, and Laura's show became really popular. Then, sophomore year, she did a more serious show about how college campuses can feel, and can actually be, unsafe for female students. She interviewed girls from all over the country, not just McCormack, and the consensus was that girls felt most frightened and vulnerable when they were walking alone off campus. So Laura came up with solutions on how to fix it, which was for the university to hire private drivers to shuttle students to and from campus on nights and weekends. She called the program Uber U, and it caught on. Not only did McCormack adopt the Uber U program, but so did colleges across the country. Laura was invited onto Wake Up America and interviewed by Dante Campbell. Ever since then, the popularity of Laura's show has skyrocketed. She has over 1 million followers on her social media platforms. Matthew shook his head to get back on track. Anyway, over the last few weeks, Laura told me she had been investigating a story about rape on campus. McCormack University's campus? Jacqueline asked. Yes. I don't know all the details because Laura was real quiet about it. She didn't want the story to leak. But then, last week, the campus blew up after the Chadwick's press conference. It was totally about the story Laura was getting ready to tell. Then, like I said, Laura stopped returning my calls and texts over the weekend and went silent on social media. Her parents called me on Sunday to ask if I'd heard from her. I told them I hadn't, and Laura's parents reported her missing on Sunday. Then yesterday, 2 police officers showed up at my apartment to ask a bunch of questions. About Laura? Jacqueline asked. Yeah, about Laura, and about whether we'd had a fight recently, and about a bunch of other stuff. Did you answer their questions? Yeah, but after a while I started getting scared, so I told them I wanted to call my parents. Mr. Claymore leaned forward onto the conference table. The police asked Matthew if he would come down to the precinct office to answer more questions during a formal interview, and to provide DNA samples. I instructed him to do no such thing until we obtained legal counsel. I pray Laura is safe, and this turns out to be a big scare or misunderstanding. But I've heard enough horror stories to know that if something has happened to this poor girl, then the first person the authorities are going to look at is her boyfriend. Jacqueline nodded. Have you had any contact with the police since they questioned you yesterday? No, Matthew said. A detective left a voicemail this morning asking me to call him back. But you haven't? No. Okay, Jacqueline said. And as far as you know, no one has yet heard from Laura? No, Matthew shrugged. I've texted her a bunch of times, and I talked with her friends. No one's heard from her and no one's seen her. Jacqueline tapped her pen on the legal pad as she thought. First things first, do not speak to the police without Garrett or me being present. If they come to your apartment, tell them you want to call your attorney and then get in touch with me immediately. I'll give you my cell number. In the meantime, one of our investigators will be in touch with you to more thoroughly go over the details of your relationship with Laura, as well as some other information we're going to need. Then, and only then, I'll arrange a formal interview with the police. But we'll do it under our rules, and I'll be present with you when it happens. Parting handshakes were exchanged, and just like that, Lancaster and Jordan had a new high-profile case on their hands. Chapter 36. Washington, D.C. Tuesday, April 25th, 2023, 10:00 a.m. At a formative age, Alex recognized the dangers alcohol posed, and made the decision to never touch the stuff, Had she lived a normal adolescence, it might have been different. She might have experimented with alcohol during her high school days, as most kids do, and come out unscathed. But in the wake of a tragedy suffered when she was young and impressionable that had her bouncing between continents, running from the press, and being cornered by psychopaths attempting to extort her, Alex knew that the lure of alcohol came with pitfalls. Now, 28 years old and far into the next phase of life, she was at a point where perhaps alcohol could be enjoyed as a social tool rather than a crutch. But she wasn't very social, and her occupation never placed her in situations where communal existence was necessary, save for a yearly Lancaster and Jordan Christmas party that she usually skipped. And so at some point between breaking free from the angst of her teen years and reaching her late 20s, the window of opportunity had closed, and she no longer found curiosity in what alcohol might do for her or to her. Coffee, however, was another story. Her latest fascination was vacuum siphoning, a dual-chamber device that allowed vapor pressure to force hot water to mix with the coffee grounds. Alex had experimented with the timing and found that 6.5 minutes produced the smoothest blend. She tasted her morning's brew now, and satisfied, took her mug to the couch and pulled up her laptop. She started each morning the same way: coffee and news, followed by an hour working at her evidence board before heading into the office. After 30 minutes of scanning world news headlines, she narrowed her interests to the DC area and came to a story that stopped her cold. It was in the Washington Times. Local businessman shot in home invasion. Byron Zell, the former chief financial officer for Schuster Industries, was found dead in his DC apartment early Monday morning. Police have offered few details about the homicide, other than that Zell died from gunshot wounds and was found by a family member. Zell was involved in a lawsuit with Schuster Industries over alleged embezzlement of company funds. But Zell's legal problems did not end there. He had also recently been charged with possession of child pornography, and that case was still under investigation at the time of his death. No other information has been released. This is a developing story. Alex swiped her screen and began searching for other articles when her phone rang. It was Garrett. Hello? I need you at the office right away. We have a developing situation. What's up? I have a folder at the office that covers the details, and will bring you up to date. New client, a missing persons case, and a possible connection to the mess going on with Larry Chadwick and McCormack University. Don't know all the details yet. We want you on the case, but need to be fast on this. The potential for media coverage is high, and before long, McCormack University will be teeming with nosy reporters. We want to know what we're dealing with before we get too deep. Jacqueline's taking the lead, and she'll brief you at the office. I'll be there in 30 minutes. See you then. Hey, Garrett. Did you see the news about Byron Zell? I did. What do you make of it? We'll talk about Byron Zell later. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm worried about your little adventure now that his apartment is a crime scene. But I'm trying to run a law firm, and we have bigger worries at the moment. I'm sure the police will want to speak with me about Byron Zell and the child pornography angle. I don't plan to mention that you were the investigator assigned to his case, unless I'm pressed. Please help me help you, Alex. Stay away from the Byron Zell story. A pause fell onto the conversation. Alex? Yeah. You understand what I'm telling you? Yeah. Got it. See you in 30. Yeah, Alex said, staring at the Byron Zell article. See you soon. She ended the call and ran once more through her stealth break-in to the man's apartment. By the time she finished her coffee, Alex had almost convinced herself that she had left nothing behind that would point to her presence, even if a crime scene unit dusted every surface.